translate that as their life is falling apart. But be careful how you frame these things, because the way you frame them can tell you everything about why you're experiencing it, because you think it should have gone another way. The idea is to allow yourself to recognize that whatever it is that is happening for a reason. And the reason is there's a belief there you need to look at that's creating that experience. So if you're going through something that feels like your life is falling apart, it's probably because you had a definition that is so rigidized that doesn't necessarily manifest in the way you insisted it must, that's going to appear to you as if your life is falling apart, when in fact it may actually be falling open, so that you can see there may be other paths that are better for you than the one you were insisting on. So watch the definitions even when you frame a question that way. That could be in and of itself what's causing the situation to feel negative, just by framing it as if it's true that the life is falling apart. There is another way to look at it. Find it.
All right. And along those lines, the idea of feeling lost. If a person feels that feeling of I feel lost, what is the appropriate or better way to interpret that state as opposed to I can't what's the best way to deal with that state?
Why do you think that's any different than what we just talked about?
Okay, so you're saying that you're interpreting what's happening in a negative way.
Yes.
So what that creates the feeling of being lost. And instead, if you feel that lost feeling, better to refocus on the idea of adapting and reinventing oneself.
Don't overcomplicate it. Remember the initial question. Anytime, first and foremost, remember, you cannot have a feeling without a belief first. You can't. It's not possible. So any feeling that you believe is negative, any feeling that's uncomfortable, the question is, what would I have to believe is true about myself in order to feel it the way I'm feeling it? You cannot have a feeling in a vacuum. Keep it simple. Remember the principles we have shared, how it works, and ask the appropriate question and be willing to explore and hear the answer. It's that simple. Don't overcomplicate it.
Okay, and this is the same question, but this individual is saying how thing after thing happens and they attempt to stay neutral, but basically it still comes down to, regardless how it looks, you cannot allow yourself the luxury of interpreting it in a negative way.
You can allow yourself that luxury if you wish to wallow in the negativity. That's fine. It's your choice. I'm not telling you you can't do it. I'm telling you you don't have to choose that. And I've also instructed you as to the way to not choose it. So yes, it's exactly the same thing that we just talked about.
Okay. So I think that answers the question of what this person was saying, which is, what am I doing wrong?
Nothing. You're not doing anything wrong, but you are giving in to belief systems that you don't prefer. That's your choice. If you're tired of doing that, use the techniques that we're talking about and make a different choice. One choice over another is not more important, doesn't carry more weight. The universe, all that is, isn't going to judge you for whatever you choose, and isn't going to take sides and say, this is good and this is bad. You are either in alignment with all that is, or you're out of alignment with all that is, but you're still within all that is, no matter what you choose. So you always have the opportunity to come back into alignment with the frequency of unconditional love for yourself by making the choices that are more representative of that. And that doesn't just mean being nice to yourself. It means making the choices to choose definitions that work for you as opposed to the ones that don't. To be true to yourself. That's what we're saying here. We're not talking about just skipping down the boulevard singing happy songs. We're talking about when challenges come up, taking a moment, taking a pause, and actually realizing that you have a choice to make about how you will relate to the circumstance that's manifesting every single moment. Choose what you prefer. Choose the definitions that work. Stop choosing the definitions that don't. You are completely free to do that. Use your freedom. Use your free will.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So we have some ET questions here now.
Oh, all right.
Let's see. The souls of people on Earth never leave their real home, as we are like dreaming and playing an online game.
Yes, you're all in spirit.
So I would like to know if there's also a situation for Essassani beings as well. Are you also having dreams and your souls are in your real home, and then Bashar as an extraterrestrial being may also be an avatar or some experience that is in Bashar's dream?
Yes. Everyone is in spirit. Everyone, everywhere. That's the natural state of all consciousness, non-physical, as you would understand that term. So every physical reality of any kind, any projection of any kind, in a sense, is the spirit having a dream to have a certain experience. Yes, we're all the same in that context.
Okay. And are you in contact with beings who identify themselves as Ra, or the raw material, a series of channeled books that claim to be an extraterrestrial social memory complex?
Yes, we understand. We know what that is.
So you're aware of their
Yes.
or whatever.
Yes.
Is extraterrestrial in nature?
Well, more extra-dimensional, but it can have an extraterrestrial expression.
Okay. And one person is saying that they have certain spiritual visions and dreams and all these things that are very exciting to experience.
Yes.
But then they find that they're quite different than what the physical reality is that they're living. And they just wanted to understand how to not feel that disappointment, in a sense, that the grand visions and the exciting things they're experiencing on.
All right, well, again, we have to some degree discussed the idea of dropping your insistences and assumptions about how you think things are supposed to happen and allow yourself to relate to things in a more positive way through the definitional relationships that you create with whatever it is that's happening in the way that it's happening. It's happening that way for a reason, and the reason may simply be that this is the way it really needs to happen to serve you best. Or the reason may be that it brings your attention to something about the definitions you're using to create a less than pleasant experience for yourself, a disappointing experience for yourself. You are disappointing yourself from the present by buying into definitions that don't work for you. So reappoint yourself into the present by choosing definitions for what's happening that work for you, instead of assuming that the way it's happening can only have a negative definition that doesn't work. There is always another way to look at something that can actually serve you better.
Okay, and this question is, how do UFOs keep their occupants safe from the extreme G-forces in Earth's gravity field when the ships make dynamic maneuvers?
Because there is a field around the ship that allows the ship to move space-time with it. Therefore, there's no motion relative to space-time within the ship, because space-time is moving in a bubble around the ship. The ship is moving in a space-time bubble. So it's as if, relative to space-time, it's not moving. So there are no G-forces.
I don't know if this is the same thing, but in the movie Contact, when Jodie Foster was being dropped through a certain energy field.
Not the same thing.
No.
That was the utilization of a concept you call a wormhole.
I see. Okay, and the souls of people on... Wait, no, I got that one already. Hi, if I hear Bashar's voice before he speaks through the channeler, does that also mean I'm a channeler?
In a manner of speaking. Now, it doesn't mean you will channel me, but it does mean you may be sensitive to the vibrations of beings on different levels, different parallel realities, different dimensions, so on and so forth. And you may be tapping into and giving yourself a slightly ahead of time preview of what's coming in. So yes, you may have the sensitivity to pick up on information coming from other dimensional realms and allow yourself to concretize it or manifest it within your brain, maybe a split second before or simultaneously with it coming through another person who may be channeling. So yes, you may have that sensitivity. Now, you can perhaps use that to channel some other being or portions of your higher self, or you may use it in other ways. But as we have often said, by acting on your passion, you're pulling yourself into the channeling state anyway. So it's just a matter of what it is you wish to do with that channeling state while you're in it. But by being more used to the idea, by practicing the idea of being in a channeling state, by acting on your passion, following your excitement, being true to yourself, being in alignment with all that is, yes, your consciousness may expand to the point where you can pick up on communications coming from many different sources. So that's not that unusual.
And for people who are named after a particular month, such names like April, May, or June,
Yes.
or people with associated names like Juno or Junior, do they have unique karmic ties to that month?
Again, they may have thematic ties, but it's not about karma.
Right. And what about people who have names like Dove or Robin or Tiger?
Everything is a permission slip. Everything may be representative of the theme that they chose to come in with, which may be why a name was crystallized along those lines. It doesn't have to be that way, but it can be that way. Sometimes a soul will deliberately choose a name that reminds the soul of the theme.
That makes sense. To what extent do the channel's beliefs and opinions influence the information that comes through him from Bashar?
At this point, 39 years in the practicing of the channeling of us, relatively little. There may be some things we take into account that have to do with the channel's recognition or cognition or understanding of things in your physical reality that can add a little bit of a difference or a color to it that would be a little bit different than the way we might express it in our own reality. But there is relatively little influence over the general concepts that we share with you.
Okay.
Because the channel doesn't care. It's not the channel's life that we're talking about.
What do you do when you're not connecting with Daryl? Do you live a regular life compared to the one that we're living here on Earth?
In some senses. As I have said, I am a pilot, I am an explorer, I am doing first contact scenarios with other civilizations other than yours. I am also a sculptor, and I do many other kinds of things. But our reality is very different than yours. It is like we are literally living, walking through a dreamscape all the time, connected to many different dimensions, including spirit, and having conversations with multiple entities simultaneously. That's a part of our quote-unquote normal, regular daily life.
And what is your definition of memory, and how can your race function without it? How can you tell us consistent biological stories from your life without memory?
Because we simply tap into what we need to know in the moment we need to know it. All I'm simply saying is our brains don't have to be wired to hold on to information. Our brains are wired in a way that the information that is required at that moment to serve a purpose simply is there because we're tapping into the source of all information, which is all that is here and now. So we don't need memory in the classical sense of a brain being wired to store information. We use the universe, we use all that is as our storage place, and therefore by being fully aligned with it, we simply download whatever information we need at any given moment.
Would that be related to the idea that you know how to tap into the electromagnetic field and receive energy, whereas on our planet, we're still working with memory and looking for ways to have unlimited energy?
Yes. If you would allow yourselves more openness to allow through, or if you wish, channel the idea of the general vibrational energy of unconditional support and love that is all that is, then you would function much in the same way that our civilization does with respect to memory as well, and with respect to your relationship to different forms and expressions of energy.
It's fascinating. Okay, this question is, person wants to ask about the Bible story of Adam and Eve and
Yes.
original sin.
Yes.
Who were they? Were there two trees in the Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge and the tree of good and bad? And who were those that said now they are like us when they committed this original sin? What was the original sin, and what was this fruit of knowledge of good and bad? Can you tell us more about it?
Yes. Again, the terminology, Adam, Eve, these are generalizations. Adama meaning simply man or human. Eva simply meaning female. The creation of Homo sapiens by the Anunnaki hundreds of thousands of years ago, by the utilization of a hominid that was naturally evolved on Earth, that was then infused with the genetics of the Anunnaki extraterrestrial race to create Homo sapiens. But the Homo sapiens were created at a certain genetic level, and they were, in general, forbidden to access certain kinds of information that would make them equal to the Anunnaki. So they were forbidden from accessing, or were not permitted to access, certain levels of knowledge that would make them equally powerful to the extraterrestrials. That is the us. And therefore the idea of the tree of knowledge is a metaphor for the idea of the branches of knowledge that the Anunnaki knew that Homo sapiens was prevented from learning. But when they did make a breakthrough, because one of the Anunnaki gave them the access to that knowledge, and they became more enlightened, more aware of what was going on in their relationship to the Anunnaki that had created them, then they started becoming more like the Anunnaki. They started to evolve along certain lines, which the Anunnaki at that time didn't appreciate or prefer. And this is also why those Anunnaki were ultimately recalled by their civilization, because they had broken their laws by creating this race for the purposes for which they had created them, to help them in their tasks on Earth. This is a complex and a very rich story that has a lot of metaphor in it, a lot of symbolism in it, but that is the general idea behind what you are asking.
And also the idea of female being created from Adam's rib. Is there anything you can share with us about?
Well, again, it's a genetic metaphor. Genetic material was utilized from the being that was neither male or female in the very beginning of the genetic hybridization, and thus it was split apart to allow one to beget the other, in the sense of an upgrade or an improvement in the female from the male.
And in Atlantean times, did they use telepathy mainly as their communication method, or was it still verbal?
It was mostly verbal. There were a few of the priests that could communicate telepathically, but that is a feature that is more ancient in terms of the Lemurian civilization. They were far more telepathic. That became lost over time. Most Atlanteans communicated verbally.
You've mentioned that Sasquatch is able to hop from one dimension to another.
Yes.
And are there other physical beings from mythology, such as the Thunderbird, the Mermaid, or the Pixie folk, that physically interact with our Earth as a species?
Yes. What you again call the elementals, many of which present themselves in certain forms at certain times, but they can change their form because they're not, shall we say, permanently crystallized in the way that humans are, or other beings on Earth that are mostly physical. They can shapeshift in a variety of ways because they are sort of made out of the clay of the consciousness of the collective whole. But they interact in their own way many times. Now, some of the beings you mentioned are different in nature than simply the elementals, and some of them are representative of genetic experiments that were done long ago. Some of them are representative of extra dimensionals that come from other places entirely. So you're kind of mixing up in that question some different beings and different species that don't have the same relation to Earth as the elementals might.
So the idea of like a dragon, were dragons real, or are they mythological?
Dragons are real in their own dimension, but they don't look like the way they look to you unless they shall we say, project themselves into your reality. They represent the idea of ancient wisdom, a grander version of the ancient wisdom of the serpent, but they don't look like that in their own reality because they are ultra-dimensional. Therefore, they can only take on certain forms in your reality when people perceive them or have the ability to perceive them that look a certain way that represents the level of power they're exhibiting and the relationship they have archetypally to the collective consciousness of your planet.
And what about mermaids?
Mermaids, in some sense, although there are differences in this story and different sources in this story of mermaids, some of which were created genetically in Atlantean times to see if humans could breathe underwater and were given certain fish-like attributes. But some mermaid perceptions also come from interactions with the beings from Sirius who are amphibious and do have certain qualities that you would relate to the idea of mermaids or mermen. So this is kind of mixed up in different sources of information that you have sort of rendered into a single mythology.
So when we find ourselves attracted to certain mythologies like mermaids or Sasquatch also, although it's not a mythology, I guess the idea is simply just to continue to explore that particular being because there's information in it for the person that's involved.
Yes, you may be using the connection as a permission slip based on the theme that you're choosing to explore that can help guide you, yes.
And what is your definition of nature? How is it that some people appear tied on a karmic level to an element of nature, like the sailor who loves the sea or the lumberjack who loves the forest?
Yes.
Basically, how do we...
Again, it's the theme. It's the theme. Theme, 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 theme. Not karma. Theme. Karma is what you use to allow yourself to align to your theme. But it's theme that you're talking about, not karma.
So basically, there's different levels to the theme, right? Because
yes.
Most of us are on a transformational theme journey right now. That's about becoming more empowered, more connected with the higher self.
Yes, and there can be themes within the theme. There can be mini themes, yes.
So, for example, if someone's attracted to mermaids or being in the ocean, then that could be a permission slip or a way to deepen the experience of the theme.
Yes.
So you can trust it, whatever you're attracted to.
As long as you are honest in your self-examination as to why you're attracted to it, because you can fool yourself if you're in denial of certain energies that may be more representative of anxiety than excitement. So you have to be honest in your self-investigation. But as long as you are, then yes, you can trust the synchronicity that brings you certain archetypal forms or representations that may help augment your theme.
And even the idea that an individual can, I guess, compartmentalize.
Yes.
Information, negative behavior, negative choices in such a way that they don't experience the repercussions of it, at least from the standpoint of those observing.
Yes, because again, that's not what karma is. They may go through a life without the equipment, so to speak, without the knowledge, so to speak, of how to self-correct. They may view through their attenuated belief systems the idea that what they're doing is positive when it's negative. These things will ultimately be understood when you are in spirit if they're not understood in the physical experience, because you will always go through what is typically called life review, where you will examine exactly what the consequences of your choices were, and you will experience the consequences of your choices as everyone experienced them in terms of your relationship with them and to them. So the idea is that you will get to experience every consequence that everyone felt of the choices you made, and that will bring you the understanding that is required for you to move on, and that doesn't necessarily have to happen in the physical life, but it will happen in the spirit level at some point. But again, it's not karma.
Right, right. And so the fact that someone will even question whether or not something they're doing is positive or negative and be willing to explore what could potentially be
That's
mental information.
that's karma. The willingness to explore, the willingness to observe, the willingness to investigate and take the actions necessary to determine whether or not you are in alignment with who you truly are and all that is. That's karma.
So something that's very telling is when a person is not self-reflective
Yes.
about the choices they're making. They don't question anything about it. They're just so sure they're right, or whatever they're doing, be it negative,
Yes.
does not seem to penetrate that there's anything wrong with what.
Yes. And that may be a theme that they're exploring, or again, they may simply have been bereft of the equipment or the knowledge in order to self-correct. But again, at some point, they will self-correct. But again, they simply may not have the ability to use karma in a positive way for themselves until they get into spirit. But that's all right. Again, you're all eternal. You're all infinite. You'll figure it out somewhere, somehow. Doesn't have to happen in the life. Although many people choose the life to figure these things out in physical terms, and it can be very beneficial and very accelerative for you to do so. But it's not something that's demanded by all that is, because all that is knows you will experience the realization somewhere, because you can't escape the vibration of all that is. There's nothing outside of it. So everything has to happen within it, and at some point, somewhere, somehow, somewhen, no matter when that is, where that is, or how that is, you will realize the connections and the consequences of all the choices you are making, and that will be a lesson that you can use to move on.
And very often, one of the themes that we experience here on Earth is sort of the coming of age story.
Yeah.
The idea of losing our naivete.
Well, shall we put it in the terms of gaining more insight instead of losing something?
Well, often it's experienced as a loss of the ideals of youth, the loss of what that life is not always quote unquote.
Then you have not come of age.
So that story that we tell ourselves on Earth about the disillusionment of youth, that eventually as you grow up, you will come to experience the harsh reality of physical reality that's quite different than as a child you thought it might be, or you idealistically believed.
You will come to realize the choices that are now available to you on a higher level of cognition. Yes. But to say that you have to face the harsh realities is already painting a negative picture.
So this is another one of our stories that
yes.
change.
Yes.
It's quite ingrained in our culture, at least in many cultures, sort of as the hero's
yes.
journey.
Yes, we understand that, but the hero's journey doesn't talk about harsh realities. It simply talks about facing challenges. And as we have often said, challenges don't have to be negative. So don't misinterpret the hero's journey. That's not what it means in its neutral form.
Okay. So I think that's pretty much, here's the last one is, you mentioned that we all have to get our issues out on the table so we can decide what kind of a reality we want as we make our way towards open contact.
Yes.
Obviously, things like war and conflict appear to be one of those themes right now.
Yes.
Can you list some other collective themes, and can you address the getting it out on the table idea?
We will not go deeply into this at this time. This will be a subject for a different transmission. But the idea in general is to, again, take individual personal responsibility for what you can, take the actions that you can that are positive, that could be of assistance and of service to others, to help them see that there may be other ways to do things that are more constructive. Allow yourselves to let go of old and outdated definitions of things in your religious and sociological and political spectrums, among others, and allow yourself to move forward in truth that is true for you, without denial, without anxiety, but in joy and in love and in passion. And that is all we will say about that for now. And we will then welcome you to continue now in your following exercise in relaxation and in comfort.